On this, the first episode of the First Three podcast, Love is in the Air, we are going to look at some of the interesting romance offerings from the spring season, including BokuYaba, Kimi wa Hokugo Insomnia, Skip and Loafer, and Yamada-kun 999. So if you've somehow found your way to the First Three anime podcast here, what is this show going to be about? Well, it's going to be following anime's golden rule, which is that the first 3 episodes of any show should give you enough to formulate an opinion as to whether you are going to keep going with the show or if you're going to drop it. Now, does anime's golden rule work for every show? No, not exactly, but it is surprising how many shows it does work for. So what I'll be doing for you is giving you a little bit of a summary of what happens in the first 3 episodes of a show. We'll look at who's behind the production, and we'll just offer a little bit of analysis as to, what kind of themes are coming up in a show. And there will also be instances where we cover a show in its entirety. I already can't wait to do this with Witch from Mercury. And I'm also hoping that we can touch on video games every now and then. Feel like I could already talk for hours about Tears of the Kingdom. And hopefully down the line we'll have some guests on the show. But for now it's just me doing NPR voice here. Oh, and I guess that reminds me, I should probably introduce myself. I'm Michael Lee, and I've been researching anime and anime fandom for quite a while now. I've got a master's degree from NYU. I spent my time there between the journalism school and the East Asian Studies department, and my final research project was a look at the fandom behind Anohana. Back in the day, it was all the hotness, and I was over in Japan. I went to a ton of different events focused on the show, talked to a lot of the fans. It was a really cool experience. And since then, I've written some things for Kotaku, Polygon, Anime News Network, but the real reason that I wanted to start this podcast was because it's really hard being a freelance writer these days when, jobs are getting cut left, right, and center. Freelance pay rates are abysmal, and there's just so much uncertainty when we look to what the future of anime or video game criticism might look like. So what I'm hoping is that through this podcast and through the Patreon that is attached to this podcast, patreon.com/thefirst3, we can start to build some kind of like a fund that can be used to kind of like finance freelance writers' projects. There's so many great ideas and great stories that could be told, but when you're only getting a couple of $100 for like a month's worth of work, it's just not sustainable. So if we can start to really build something cool here, and pay people what they deserve to be paid, I think it would be a really great thing. So that's kind of why this podcast exists, and I hope that you enjoy it. So let's get things started here on the First Three with our first show. Charming little rom-com by the name of Skip and Loafer, from the manga of the same name by Takamatsu Misaki. So I wanted to kick off this podcast with a show that really does deliver in its first 3 episodes. Although it's interesting in that Skip and Loafer hits you in episode 1 with kind of like what it is and kind of everything about it that's going to matter, and in the subsequent episodes it just kind of reinforces what you already learned in episode 1. So what is it? Skip and Loafer is your typical fish out of water story, and we're introduced to our fish, as it were, Iwakura Mitsumi, who hails from the remote Ishikawa prefecture, which is way out there, and she is moving to Tokyo to attend a prestigious high school. Her goal in life is to become a politician, and so going to a school in Tokyo makes a lot of sense, and that's kind of how it kicks off. And as Mitsumi and her fellow classmates kind of prepare for their first day of high school, some great little scenes, but what you immediately notice is how much of a very clear style this show has. The show is cute, it's very clean, and kind of the litmus test here is you should take a look at the opening theme animation, and if that does it for you, then you're gonna like this show. It features just a perfect little dance between Mitsumi and our male lead, Shima Sosuke, and it's just one of the best little animated sequences I've seen in the last little while for sure. A real winner, and if that kind of catches your eye, then it's definitely going to be a show for you. So episode 1 has a very strong focus on Mitsumi. She is a very headstrong, diligent, hardworking kid, and she is the first-year representative who has to give a little speech on the opening day of classes. But she's running late as Tokyo's subway system has proven to be too much for her, and so she kind of spaces out. But luckily for her, she runs into Shima Sosuke, who just happens to be a classmate of hers who is also running late, and the two decide to team up and make their way to school together. It's a great, if a little bit stereotypical, first chance meeting of our two main characters. They make it to school just in the nick of time, and Mitsumi is able to deliver her speech, though the nerves of everything kind of get to her, and she ends up puking all over her homeroom teacher, earning her the unfortunate nickname of the Puker. But from here, the show kind of like gets into the groove of what it's about, and it's kind of the relationships between the different students. You have Mitsumi kind of slowly coming out of her shell, though you can tell that she is pretty overwhelmed by all of this big city living, where she came from a middle school that only had 8 students in her grade. She's here in Tokyo, this thriving, huge metropolis. But one constant that she's noticed in her first day is that Shima Sosuke is also in her class, and he wants to be friends. So in episode 1, you get a lot of here's the scene, here are your characters, here is the kind of core relationship. It gives you everything, and it's very nicely stylized. So it's a clean first episode that kind of sets the tone nicely for what is to come. So a lot of shows that are kind of following with the first 3 rule here, they'll try to really drive home some kind of like plot elements, and then they'll kind of expand the cast out a little bit, give us, kind of a full kind of picture of what to expect with this show. But a lot of the business is done in the first episode there. So for a lot of people, it's going to be a yay or nay right off the bat there. Episodes 2 and 3 just kind of like further draw you into the vibe of the show. So it's a lot of Mitsumi kind of reaching out to a different student, kind of getting to know someone. And while it certainly is like idealized, the show does do a pretty good job of kind of capturing those first few uncertain days of a new school and kind of what that feeling is like. So while the plot might seem a little bit by the numbers, it's a setting that we've seen before, it's a kind of a relationship dynamic that we've seen before. But as I've said before, what it really boils down to is that Skip and Loafer has a lot of style, and that is a direct result of the person who is running this ship here, and that is Dei Kotomi, who is handling directing and series composition, so really kind of overseeing some big significant chunks of how this show is going to run itself. And there is a great article about Dei Kotomi on the sakugaboru.com blog, which is honestly a fantastic resource with some great analysis of the artistic side of anime. Definitely worth checking out, but they've got a nice little feature up on Dei Kotomi. She's directed parts of Kids on the Slope, Silver Spoon, as well as Natsume Yujincho, or Natsume's Book of Friends. She's a really steady hand and is able to bring out a lot of the source materials kind of vibe in the works that she is responsible for directing or doing, composition for or art direction for, etc., etc. And so with Skip and Loafer, what we've got here is a real good showcase for kind of the style that she brings. And it's really cool that under Dei, her two chief animation directors are Igawa Reina and Umeshita Manami, so two more women also working on this show, which is pretty rad that they're occupying such key roles in the production here for Skip and Loafer. So because the show is really a focus on Mitsumi, it leaves Shima as a bit of an enigma, even to Mitsumi herself. She's always kind of wondering, like, what this guy's deal is. Why is this guy so nice to me? And we only get little hints that maybe being the hot guy in class isn't all it's cracked up to be. So just little moments where Shima seems a bit down, or he's kind of, there's little things that are being teased out that maybe, not all is as it seems. He seems like a really nice guy. So hopefully it's nothing too, awful or tragic or anything, but just little bits here and there. So the focus really is on Mitsumi and her journey. She goes to karaoke for the first time. She goes to a movie theater in Shibuya. She then goes to a Starbucks for the first time because the closest one to her hometown was 3 hours away by bus. So we're getting all these nice little moments of her finding herself in Tokyo. It really is interesting because on paper it doesn't look like a whole heck of a lot. Like it's a story that a lot of people who are familiar with anime will have probably come across at some point. But I think it really is the style of the show that kind of wins people over. It's got a very strong sense of what it is, and when the aesthetics are on point like that, it really is an easy to consume kind of show. And when your two leads are so likable, and I have to say I really love Mitsumi and Shima, they're both great. Mitsumi is played by Kurosawa Tomoyo, who was also Kumiko from Hibike Euphonium, and Shima is played by Egoshi Akinori, who hasn't done a lot of main role work, but has been kind of plugging away in some smaller roles, and he really fits the bill as this kind of aloof but kind of nice, caring guy. Really nice foil to Mitsumi's kind of like uptight and Genki kind of attitude. And because they play off each other so nicely, that's a really key component to any romance story like this. You gotta like the two leads, and in this case, they win you over right away. And given that the first 3 episodes don't really introduce too much in the way of heavy plot elements, relying on that chemistry is kind of key. The little tease that we get, I guess, is that in the 3rd episode, Mitsumi looks to join the student council, and she is told that she's kind of got to follow a different path to get there. She has to join this volunteer group that kind of supports the student council, known as the Tsubame Kai. So that kind of gives you at least a little idea of what Mitsumi might be working on in the background, at least while her relationship with Shima kind of blossoms, is that she's going to work her way towards maybe becoming a student council member down the line. But that's really it when it comes to huge plot that we see. It's all kind of like vibes early on in this series, and I think, in this case it's kind of fine. The chemistry between the main characters works, and the supporting cast is strong. There's certain kind of stereotypical aspects to these characters, so you can easily kind of read them, but it's all about Mitsumi's interactions with them that kind of carries it forward and makes it kind of work. So it's a show that in its first 3 episodes does do a fair bit to give you a good sense of what this show is. So, and as I said from the start there, episode 1 really gives you everything that you need to know about the show. The episodes that follow 2 and 3 just kind of like fill in the world a little bit more and kind of like get you to kind of sink into the mood that the show is trying to convey. So a really solid outing in its first 3 episodes, and one that I would definitely recommend. Middle school is an awkward time for any kid. It's hormonal, confusing, and it's a time when imaginations run wild. You might even say ridiculous things like, "The person I want to kill most is the girl I'm crushing on." And that is the premise of our next show, Boku no Kokoro no Yabai Yatsu, also known by its English title, The Dangers in My Heart. BokuYaba comes to us from Shin-Ei Animation, who also worked on Karakai Jouzu no Takagi-san, Teasing Master Takagi-san, and is also being helmed by that show's director, Akagi Hiroaki. And being a big fan of Takagi-san put BokuYaba on my radar here. And when you combine that with scripts by Hanada Juki, who comes from Kyoto Animation, having worked on Chunibyo and K-On, as well as A Silent Voice, all based on a well-received manga written by Sakurai Norio, it feels like all the pieces are in place for a hit here, and I think after the first 3 episodes of this series, it's hitting all the marks. So let's dig into what makes this series so special. Now, I'm not gonna lie, the first few episodes are a little bit rough, trying to capture that energy of what it's like to be a middle school kid. It feels like the show is a bit lewd, a bit rough around the edges, and not quite as clean as some like rom-coms kind of start off the bat. It's a bit dirty at times, and it's one of the things that has turned off a lot of people early on. It's a show where the first 3 episodes are a real test for the viewer. You have to kind of trust that all the pieces that you see are gonna fall into place in the right way, and it's not gonna go south completely. So it shows you a little bit of something, and you have to look at the people that are behind the show and kind of trust that the direction evens out if, your first impression was one that made you want to drop the show right away. So episode 1 opens up with our protagonist, Ichikawa Kyotaro, having some delusional thoughts, talking about how his classmates are idiots, they're all vain and full of themselves, and then Ichikawa sets his sights on Yamada-Anna, the girl in his class that he wants to kill the most. Yet, when their eyes meet across the classroom, Ichikawa quickly turns away. He's embarrassed. Something's not right. And this is our first big hint that he's not really gonna try and kill anybody. He's actually totally in love with this girl. So Ichikawa retreats to the library, his safe domain, but he's not alone in the library. Yamada also uses the library as an escape, except she prefers to use the library to snack away in private. She cracks open a big bag of potato chips and starts working on some schoolwork, and generally seems kind of like a big dork. Ichikawa was under the impression that Yamada was this pretty girl, she's a magazine model, and she's absolutely perfect, yet we get this kind of inside look at what she's really like, and that already sets Ichikawa off. He's like, who is this chick? So the series is giving us a really good look at our 2 main characters, Ichikawa and Yamada, and one of the key locations where these 2 will meet up again in the future, the library. So in terms of setting up the world and setting up the characters, this first episode does a really good job of establishing kind of what the relationship dynamic of our 2 main characters is as it stands now, and just little hints about where we might be going with these 2. And a lot of this first episode really takes place in Ichikawa's head. All of the thoughts that are going through it, thinking about what his relationship to Yamada is. They've kind of hit it off with a little bit of chemistry, and it really throws him off. He gets really flustered. He's really nervous throughout the episode, and he's just thinking that they're totally from different worlds. Why do I even have any kind of feelings or thoughts towards this girl? He picks up a copy of one of the magazines that she's been featured in, and this just kind of further cements his idea in his head that they're from completely different planets. But it would be a waste to simply throw the magazine away, and the show is not at all subtle about Ichikawa using the magazine to jerk it. And I'm guessing that it's scenes like this that have kind of turned off some of the viewers. But where some viewers might be seeing this as unnecessarily crass, I kind of think that it shows a painful authenticity that this is a middle school boy whose hormones are raging. And what I think that BokuYaba does so well is it cuts these kind of more lewd, ecchi kind of moments with like genuinely heartfelt moments of Ichikawa realizing his feelings for Yamada, and in the case of episode 1 here, doing something completely out of character to kind of save Yamada from this senpai who is aggressively hitting on her. We get these big dramatic swells of music from composer Ushio Kensuke, who worked on A Silent Voice, Liz and the Bluebird, and more recently Chainsaw Man. And when this music hits, I completely forget about any of the little ecchi stuff that might, rub someone the wrong way. And it becomes like such a sweet little romance. Episode 2 takes us back to the school library, and Ichikawa once again kind of spying on Yamada, still certain that he actually wants to murder her. Yamada's snack today is the kind of unusual neru neru neru, which is a powder that you add water to make this kind of like fruit-flavored whipped snack creation. And with Yamada being such a klutz, she keeps spilling the little water cup that she needs to use to create the candy itself. And it's here that we see that Ichikawa's actions from episode 1 weren't simply a one-off, that he kind of wants to help Yamada out when he can. And so in this case, he runs off to get a cup for her to hold the water in, but she solves the issue with the candy soon enough, and he has to try and pass it off as, oh, he was just looking for a cup of water for himself, actually. So what you start to notice in episode 2 is that there are going to be more of these sweeter moments of relationship building, that all of the ecchi stuff is just kind of like the background. It's the setting of this series. It's middle school, so there's going to be a lot of kind of talk in the background about stuff, but that starts to kind of fade away as we focus in on the two main characters and their kind of awkward budding relationship. With that said, there is still some degree of tonal whiplash as we go from a scene in the classroom where the boys are trying to sneak a peek at the girls' bras underneath their shirts to a heartwarming scene where Ichikawa covers for a fellow classmate taking the blame for accidentally writing Yamada's name on a tombstone prop for the cultural festival Haunted House. And I really think it's here in episode 2 that our voice actors start to give us a little bit more with the characters. Horie Shun, who I really liked as Enta in Sarazanmai, is Ichikawa here, and I think he's doing a great job of kind of giving us both sides of Ichikawa. The delusional but more assured inner monologue contrasted nicely with the awkward, shy, nervous Ichikawa that Yamada sees. And talking about Yamada, played by Yomiya Hina, in her first big kind of role, I think, here, which is pretty impressive. She has to balance both sides of Yamada here, the kind of popular girl model on one side who kind of acts a certain way, and then the like snack hoarding kind of goofball that Ichikawa sees in the library. So strong work from both of our lead actors here, which is really great. So the first 2 episodes have done a really good job of laying that foundation, setting the tone, giving us some good character bits, and episode 3 is where we really start to move things forward. This has to be the episode that really pulls in the viewers that might have been on the fence otherwise. So again, we have to kind of navigate that tonal whiplash that's going on in the first few episodes here. The A part of this episode being a little bit on the ecchi side, but the B part bringing home kind of like some bigger, chunky story elements. This is the first episode where Ichikawa really gets a look at what Yamada's life is like outside of school. The pressures that she faces as a model kind of coming to the fore here when she suffers an injury during gym class. And Ichikawa just happens to hear a phone conversation that Yamada is having with her mother about how this might affect her future job prospects. So this popular but also kind of goofy girl has these very adult responsibilities already in her life, and Ichikawa is just kind of like thrown completely for a loop by this kind of side of Yamada that he learns about here. And it's in this episode that he realizes that he's really fallen for Yamada. So when it comes to the first 3 episodes doing enough to really pull the viewer in, I think that this show does a good job of that. The tone is well established, we get some level of character development, and the plot is kind of put into motion. And I mean, I think that what we get in these first 3 episodes, there's a lot to like. I think that Ichikawa is very relatable. His awkward energy, his swirling thoughts, he feels like a middle school kid to me, so that's really working for me. The direction has been really solid, the music has been outstanding, hitting just at the right moments there. So if you can tolerate some of the pervy vibes that the show kind of puts off at times, what you'll find is that underneath all of that is a really sweet little romance here, and I think it's probably worth your time. So for our next show, we're going to be moving out of middle school and out of high school as well into the rare college territory with the show Yamada-kun to Level 999 no Koi o Suru, otherwise known as My Love Story with Yamada-kun at level 999. This series comes to us from Madhouse, one of the best anime studios in the biz, and is directed by Asuka Morio, who worked on Chihaya Furu as well as Cardcaptor Sakura, and scripts by Nakanishi Yasuhiro, who wrote for Kaguya-sama, so some pretty good pedigree here. It's also worth noting that the art director is Shimizu Tomoyuki, who also worked on Chihaya Furu and Cardcaptor with Asuka Morio. So it's cool to see some folks who have worked together. They have that history, and the aesthetic, I would say, with Yamada-kun here, it does kind of resemble Chihaya Furu in a way. So there's that kind of going for it. And Yamada-kun at level 999 comes to us from the manga by Mashiro, their first big hit manga, so pretty cool to see it turned into an anime as well. This series is categorized as shoujo, and it seems like it's kind of straddling that line between shoujo and maybe like josei, kind of being a bit more of an older focus. It probably has to do with the fact that our main character, Akane, is actually college-aged, which should make this a bit more of an interesting show to tackle. So let's get into it. What is My Love Story with Yamada-kun at level 999 all about? Episode 1 opens up with Kinoshita Akane getting dumped by her boyfriend. He's found another woman online in the game world that they both frequent, and Akane is completely heartbroken, caught off guard, doesn't know what to do, is kind of in shambles. They've been playing what looks to be kind of a generic MMORPG style game called Forest of Savior. And after getting dumped, Akane decides to log in and play for a little while, where she runs into Yamada in-game. Players in this game seem to chat only via text, and Yamada is very slow at replying. Akane is trying to get anything out of this guy, and he's just stonewalling her at every turn. It's a bit frustrating for her because she just wants to kind of like, vibe out and hang out in the game, and Yamada's making this pretty difficult with his kind of aloof approach. As she's logging off for the day, Akane notices that there's going to be an event for the game near to where she lives, and so she puts together a little plan to really, look her best at the event, because she figures that her ex-boyfriend is going to be there, and she wants to make it seem like everything is just a-okay with her. So she attends the event looking, pretty stylish, and of course her ex-boyfriend is there. But unfortunately, the new girl has already got her arm around him, and this kind of sets Akane back a little bit. She realizes that she's not ready for all of this. She's still kind of wallowing in despair over the end of the relationship, so she's kind of reeling from this when she then accidentally bumps into this mysterious, tall stranger. Akane notices that this guy kind of speaks with the same mannerisms and speech patterns as Yamada from the game world, and she thinks, this guy, I think I know this guy. And as he's kind of walking away after their little encounter, she calls out to him, and sure enough, he responds, and yeah, it's Yamada from the game. And it's here that Akane kind of cooks up a little plan where she convinces Yamada to play the role of her new boyfriend. And so they're giving away rare items for this Forest of Savior game at this in-person event. And in exchange for playing the role of her new boyfriend, Akane is going to give Yamada her rare item that she receives at the event. So they kind of, agree to the terms there, and then they go out for a meal afterwards, and Yamada just keeps this, weird, cold, distant approach. He just seems very disinterested in Akane as she kind of, vents to him, explains the whole boyfriend situation, and he seems, totally nonplussed about the whole thing. So for a rom-com, it's really starting off on an awkward foot here, with Akane still definitely not over the ex-boyfriend, and Yamada just not interested in dating at all. He even says as much, which is kind of interesting for a character to not immediately be, super into romance. So we'll see where that goes, if that kind of breaks down, but at least at the start here, you're kind of like, these two have no chemistry. How is this going to work out? They only sort of know each other through the game world. So where does the relationship start? Akane excuses herself to use the restroom, and when she returns, finds that Yamada-kun is gone. She figures he's pieced out entirely, just bored to death of her, but he actually returns a short while later, and he's run off to get some band-aids for her because of a fall that she took earlier in the day. And so this little kind of chivalrous act, I guess, gives Akane kind of this first hint that this guy might not be so bad. He still seems pretty disinterested, but they stay for another couple rounds. She is pounding back the beers, and he's just sitting and sipping cola. Flash forward to Akane waking up in a strange bed, and she comes to the realization that she is in Yamada's bed. It turns out nothing happened between the two of them. She just was piss drunk, and he had to drag her to his place so that she could just sleep it off. He cleans her clothes. And he just kind of hangs out, plays video games with some friends while she kind of comes to her senses and recovers. And she quickly leaves a little bit embarrassed. So it's here that I really started to get a sense that this show is giving us something that we don't normally see too much of in the world of anime, and that's like a college-age character who's kind of going through it. They had maybe some plans for what their future was going to look like. I'm sure that Akane thought that the ex-boyfriend was going to be the one, and they were just going to get married, have kids, do all that business, and life just throws her a complete curveball here with him dumping her. And what do you do in that situation? You vent, and then you go off and you have way too many beers one night. This is stuff that actually happens. And this show does a good job of kind of like really showing us that, yeah, Akane is not really in the best headspace right now. So it's a pretty like honest and kind of real situation that I'm sure a lot of folks, young folks, find themselves in at one point or another. And while it is kind of like played up for laughs a little bit, the whole misunderstanding of, ending up in a strange man's bed, but it does kind of hit that serious note as well. The, like, what am I doing right now? I've got to figure some stuff out here. So episode 2 gives us a little bit more of Akane kind of wallowing over the ex-boyfriend, a gift that she received, and just kind of these little hang-ups that she still has about the relationship. Akane runs into Yamada at the nearby train station where he's being confessed to by a girl but doesn't even realize it. The guy is so oblivious. Yamada refuses and the poor girl kind of slinks off, and then Akane approaches and they have a little chat about things, and when they reach the exit of the train station, it started to rain and Akane is without umbrella. So Yamada lends her his umbrella. So Yamada is quickly building up points here for being an all-around good guy. And then we get a little scene later on where Akane's mother has shipped all of the things out of Akane's childhood room, leaving Akane's small apartment crammed full of all kinds of boxes, all kinds of memories and things, and it's here that Akane calls her friend Momo, and Momo kind of sets her straight, helps her sort through all of these boxes, throw out the things that she doesn't need anymore. Kind of, symbolically, she starts to realize that she can part ways with some of the things that her ex-boyfriend bought for her and whatnot, and so she's learning kind of a valuable lesson here. But that's not going to stop Akane and Momo from hitting the town and throwing a few back. And after one too many, they end up at Yamada's apartment to return the umbrella. But really, I think Akane's probably been talking about Yamada a fair bit, and Momo wants to see what this guy's all about. Poor Yamada, he opens the door, it's like 2 in the morning or something, and they're just absolutely smashed. But he puts up with them and their kind of, dumb, silly drunkenness, and invites Akane to maybe log in and play Forest of Savior with him sometime, and she, thinks it's a pretty good idea because this guy's alright. Episode 3 gives us another kind of like more adult-focused activity where Akane and Momo head out on a group date with 2 guys from their university. It's clear that Akane is still hung up on the ex and isn't ready to date in any meaningful way. So that goes over like a lead balloon. But the main event in this episode is that the Forest of Savior guild members decide to meet up IRL. So Akane's a little bit nervous about this whole thing because she's never done a meetup before, but at least she knows Yamada, so she knows he's going to be there. Can't be all bad. And she is actually excited to meet the guild master, Rurihime, who's really genki, really keen in-game, is willing to listen to Akane when she's kind of been, going through her tough times. So Akane feels like they're going to hit it off right away, but when she gets to the meetup, the girl that she thinks is Rurihime is in fact not, and it is strongly implied as the credits roll at the end of the third episode that this guy that she happened to meet on the way there is in fact Rurihime, so a little bit of a play on the idea that online personas can be very different from who someone is IRL, and that's kind of it after the first 3 episodes. So, unlike some of the other shows that we're covering in this week's episode here, this one leaves you with not as strong an idea of where this series is going. It's really just getting started. The romance between Akane and Yamada isn't really strong in any kind of way yet. It just seems like they're kind of friendly. The series isn't like breaking the bank with the animation budget, but everything looks pretty decent. Character designs are pretty good, while Yamada has got this kind of stilted, detached kind of delivery to all of his lines here. It's still pretty good work from Uchiyama Koki, and with Akane being voiced by Minase Inori, you've got like 2 heavy hitters in your lead roles here, so just hearing their solid performances really elevates the kind of the material pretty well. But after the first 3, it's a little bit hard to judge the show because it feels like there are so many ways that it can kind of go here. Are they going to focus on the online game aspect? Is that where the relationship's going to really take off? Is it going to be more IRL stuff like this meetup thing? Is Yamada going to turn around and start to open up to Akane here? Is Akane going to get her life together? Like, it doesn't really give us any kind of sense at this point which direction it could go, which is kind of a problem if you are only kind of considering these first 3 episodes. It might not do enough for you to kind of hook you in, because it's a little bit open-ended at this point. I think there could be some really interesting stuff focused on what it's like to be a single college girl. It's not something that is covered as often in anime or manga, so seeing something other than a high school relationship is kind of exciting. There is a lot that the show could dig into, There's a fair amount of pressure placed on young women at the college age to kind of lock down a man and do the whole family thing. So it's going to be interesting to see how they kind of navigate that kind of traditional Japan, societal quirk, I guess. And if perhaps there could be some critique there that, that isn't the only way to go about doing things. Maybe Akane and Yamada's relationship can go in a different direction and be something a little less traditional. Who knows? We don't really know after the first 3 episodes, so we're going to have to either, stick it out and see what happens, or you drop it at this point, and you'll never really know. So let's finish off this week's episode with what I would say is kind of a perfect example of the thesis of this entire podcast, of following anime's golden rule. Kimi wa Hokugo Insomniacs After School, based on the manga by Ojiro Makoto, in its first 3 episodes gives you kind of everything that you need to know about the show. It sets the tone, it gives you the characters, it gives you kind of like an idea of what is going to happen a little later on in the plot, and everything about the atmosphere, the music, the vibes are just right on this one. So let's kind of dig into it and see what we think. So, Insomniacs After School focuses on 2 high school aged kids who suffer from insomnia. Episode 1 kicks off with an introduction to Nakami Ganta, our male lead, who has just been through another sleepless night. He starts to hear the morning sounds of people puttering about outside, dogs barking, going out for a walk, and he's kind of dreading another day of living his sleepless life. So what you notice right off the bat with Insomniacs After School is that the aesthetics are really polished. And when we look at who's kind of working on things behind the scenes, it becomes pretty clear why the show kind of pops like it does. The art director is Onishi Tatsuro, who came up through the ranks at Kyoto Animation, working on shows like Hibike Euphonium, bits and pieces of Free, as well as A Silent Voice. So lots of work in kind of like the high school realm there. So it makes sense why this show in a high school setting kind of hits. And equally, and I would say maybe even stronger, is the music. Hayashi Yuki is delivering the soundtrack for this one here. He's got some nice credits to his name, having worked on Haikyuu. He's doing work for My Hero Academia, Death Parade, Kisnaver, so some pretty solid work in the catalog there. And what Hayashi is able to do is for each little scene in the show is got a little piece of music to go with it that just fits the scene perfectly. And for a show that is about the vibes, having all your little tracks kind of like match up to a scene and really amplify it and just give you that cozy feeling is really key. And so Hayashi Yuki does a really good job of that, and it was a real standout. Like early on, you're like, this doesn't sound like your typical anime soundtrack. This sounds like someone's put in some effort on it. So between those two, and the director is Ikeda Yuki, and scripts by Ikeda Rintaro, and neither of them have done too much. Ikeda Rintaro wrote some scripts for Poco's Udon World, which is also kind of like a vibes show, and so it's not surprising that the vibes are carrying over on this one as well. But, some kind of like newer talent kind of getting a chance to really shine here, and early on it's really paying off. So the first episode does a really good job of kind of setting the scene for us, getting us invested in the characters, which is what you're looking for in a first episode. It's got to kind of lay out what the show kind of is. And we go through a typical day in school with Nakami. There's some kind of cultural festival event going on. The kids are all preparing for something, and Nakami's just trying to look for a place to, take a quick nap. He gets called out for it, and this is where we get to see that some of his classmates think he's a bit of a weirdo. He's kind of that outcast in the class because he hasn't told anybody about his insomnia, and so they just kind of think he's strange. The only person that he has told about the insomnia is his childhood friend Ukegawa, who we meet next. So it's nice to introduce this character at this point. We get to kind of see a little bit more about what Nakami's world is like. And Ukegawa's a really nice guy. He's your typical kind of like Genki friend who's just wants the best for his bro. And then it's here that Nakami then makes his way up to the school's observatory, which houses the very expensive-looking telescope. He notices that the observatory, which has been, closed off to the students for some time, the door is ajar. He's a little curious. He walks in, and at first kind of just like, is amused at all the junk that has kind of been piled up in the observatory from other classrooms and whatnot. And then to his surprise, there's someone in the observatory taking a nap. It's Magari Izumi, our female lead. So here's kind of the big encounter between our two leads. And there's like a little bit of awkwardness at first, and it doesn't take them long to get to the point about both kind of suffering from insomnia, and that this observatory that no one seems to go to might be a nice little hangout for a couple of people that just need a break from the school day. So this is the part of the episode where our characters get to know each other a little better, which is kind of a key component for any first 3 episode viewer, is you want to start to get invested in your characters. And this show does a really good job of kind of showing you kind of how these two interact with each other early on. You can tell that they are so relieved to have found someone who's kind of in a similar position to them. And so they become fast friends. One of the questions that comes up between the two of them is, how do you spend the long and boring nights when you can't get a wink of sleep? And Nakami talks about reading all kinds of books. He listens to podcasts. He does anything he can to try and, lull himself to sleep, but nothing seems to work. And so they kind of think it might be a good idea to just kind of hang out one night and kind of walk around the city. And this is where we get a lot of really nice shots of a kind of like a quiet seaside town at night. Really nice little background work. The music is right on point. It's a really fun kind of cozy scene here. We get a little bit more information on Magari. She kind of opens up a little bit, talks about her childhood, how she was a bit of a frail kid growing up, hospital visits every now and then. So we get these little tidbits about each character that gets us invested in kind of who they are. And in a first episode, what you're really looking for is to kind of build that world out. The setting has got to kind of pop. Your characters, you got to be invested in the characters. And so when we get into the second episode, which is going to focus more on kind of what the driving plot is going to be for the show, we're already in a good place about how we feel about the vibes, how we feel about how the show looks, how it sounds, and who our characters are. So as a first episode, it does a really good job of establishing all of those things. And so when we get into episode 2, we're kind of ready to go, okay, so now what? What is this show going to be about, actually? So Nakami and Magari are trying to keep their friendship on the down low. They don't want anyone to find out that they're using the observatory as kind of their secret base. But unfortunately, someone does find out, and that is Kurashiki-sensei, one of the teachers at the school. So the ultimatum that they're given is that they'll have to resurrect the astronomy club if they're going to be allowed to keep using the observatory as their kind of, club room, as it were. And so this is kind of like the main plot that's going to be driving, the character growth and whatnot as we go through the story. They're given these kind of like tasks down the road, things they're going to have to do if their club is going to be seen as legitimate, if the club is going to be funded going forward. So it kind of is a really good way to set up what is going to happen and give our characters a chance to, use those kind of main plot points to build their kind of character relationship. And so again, this is a really great example of a second episode that kind of lets you know what the trajectory of the show is going to be from here on out, so you can kind of start to see where the show is going. And if you are just kind of focused on the first 3 episodes of a show, having an episode that really does set up the plot is really important. And so this show does a really good job of setting that up for the viewer. You have a good idea of the goals for our characters, that being the astronomy club being kind of resurrected here, so that's going to be always ongoing, and we're just going to have to see how Nakami and Magari get there. What you start to see at this point is the kind of chemistry between our 2 leads. Nakami and Magari are really starting to vibe. They're presented really well. They're awkward, they're goofy. The chemistry is just really good between them. Like, they've finally found someone who they can really relate to. No one knows what living in this insomnia world is like, and so they finally kind of found someone they can really rely on. And so the chemistry is starting to build, and it's really nice. And then episode 3 just kind of like builds on all of what we've seen before. So we get a little bit more character development. We're introduced to Shiromaru, who is a former astronomy club member, now graduated. And so they've got that kind of like a senpai to rely on, to learn things from, so they can start to, build their skill set and become better astronomers, I guess. And so we're introduced to more of the cast. We have Kurashiki-sensei kind of filling in Nakami on like what it's really going to take for them to be seen as a legitimate club in the school. So the wheels are really kind of in motion when it comes to the plot. But what episode 3 is really doing for us here is getting us back to the chemistry of our two leads. Nakami and Magari are spending a lot of time together, and people are starting to pick up that, there might be a little hint of something romantic here. And so we've, in episode 1, set the scene, giving you a kind of a rough look at our characters. Episode 2 is giving us the plot, what's going to happen in the show. And then episode 3 is diving into the characters even deeper here. And so giving you just enough of a hook with their relationship to want to kind of keep going, see where it goes. And I have to say, I want to see where this goes. Everything about this show really is a vibe. There's a lot of great romance shows on the docket this season, but something about the way this one is just a little bit more laid back. It fits into that slice of life Iyashiki kind of just really cozy vibe show. Yuru Camp, Nonon Biori, those types of shows. It's although those are more slice of life, and this one does feel like it's gonna focus a bit more on the romance angle. It's just such a cozy, good show, and it just delivers on all fronts. It looks great. The characters are interesting. The music is phenomenal. It really pulls you in nicely to every scene. And I just think that the music in a show can do so much work. And in this case, it helps you kind of connect with the show emotionally. And I just had a lot of fun watching these first 3 episodes. So it absolutely did the trick, and I'm going to keep watching it. And I think that you should too. So today we looked at 4 romance anime that each brought something different to the table. The top-notch aesthetics and assured style of Skip and Loafer. The ecchi and sweet combo that somehow works in Dangers in My Heart. Finding love as a college student, and kind of a hot mess as well, in Yamada-kun 999. And the charming characters and all-around vibes of Insomniacs After School. Now, I'll admit, I'm not really much for romance anime, but something about this season, bringing in all the big guns here apparently, I found something to like in each of the 4 shows we've featured here today. I feel like Insomniacs After School is probably the vibe that I enjoy the most. Skip and Loafer is probably a close second for me there. It's so much fun to watch. I feel like I must have the stupidest grin on my face watching Mitsumi and Shima interact with one another. It's just great chemistry between the two of them. It's super cute. But don't count out BokuYaba. I've gotten over the tonal whiplash we have between some of the kind of lewd stuff and then the really heartfelt moments here, but those heartfelt moments are so big, and the score accompanying it is so good that it's worth it for those moments. And then Yamada-kun is the one that I'm most on the fence about. It feels like there could be something really interesting here, or it could not really deliver. The first 3 episodes didn't really give me a strong enough sense, so I'll probably keep watching it, but I'm a little bit apprehensive about it. So that'll about wrap things up here for the first episode of the first 3 anime podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in, and hopefully we'll see you on the next one.